Welcome to the Nordregio Forum 2020, the annual highlight event of Nordic knowledge exchange for sustainable regional development. This year, we invite you to learn the latest from our researchers and regional experts, vote, discuss, and share your best examples on some of the hottest topics in the Nordic regions, affordable housing and how to thaw the frozen rural housing market, how to overcome barriers against inclusion, holistic city planning, what is the future of labor, how to match skills, education, and location. Broadcasted to you live from the September studio at the heart of Stockholm.
Hello there and welcome to Nordregio Forum 2020, the first in a series of events that we have lined up for you. My name is Michael Funch and I will be one of your hosts today. And we will be looking into what's going on in the regional sector throughout the Nordic countries. We do this to celebrate the results from the Nordic Cooperation Program on regional development and planning, and today we'll be focusing on housing. Normally, Nordregio Forum is a physical event where you have a chance to meet your colleagues from the other Nordic countries and hang out and mingle. But unfortunately, we, due to the circumstances, of course, will have to do this online. There will, however, be a chance for you to mingle at the end of the event, so we hope you will use that opportunity. But before we go into the event itself, we would like to welcome a special guest, the Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers, Paula Lehtomäki, who is with us from Copenhagen to give an introduction. Paula, are you there?
I am here.
Hello there and welcome to you.
Thank you.
I will give you the floor for some introductory remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very much my privilege to open this series of events which will mark the Nordregio Forum 2020. And I think it's great that even though we can't meet physically, but now the event consists of 5 online events, which gives more people the opportunity to participate and makes it possible to cover a wider range of topics. This forum also marks the conclusion of the Nordic Cooperation Program for Regional Development and Planning 2017-20. We are now looking forward to a new cooperation program for the coming years, which will be an integral part of our vision for Nordic cooperation. Our vision is that the Nordic region becomes the world's most sustainable and integrated region by 2030. This is an ambitious vision, and therefore it is necessary that all relevant actors are involved and contribute to our common work, not least civil society, our own institutions, and their partners. Nordregio and the regional sector play a significant role in the realization of our vision. Of the 12 vision goals, several are particularly important for this sector. And the new cooperation program contributes specifically to 5 vision goals, where, for example, carbon neutrality in relation to construction plays an important role. I will now talk briefly about the regional sector's cooperation program for coming years. The starting point for the cooperation is that different parts of the Nordic region have their unique strengths and conditions for development and adjustment. The purpose of the regional sector's cooperation is, of course, knowledge building and exchange of experience in the areas of regional development and spatial planning. More specifically, our program for coming years focuses on cooperation within green and inclusive urban development, green and inclusive rural development, as well as green, innovative, and resilient regions. On top of that, the program touches on a number of pressing issues. For example, how local and regional activities can contribute to the green transition, how increased mobility can boost regional growth, how to create vibrant local communities, and how to secure social cohesion in all parts of the Nordic region. All activities in the Nordic Council of Ministers contribute to fulfilling our vision for the Nordic region as the world's most sustainable and integrated region 2030. The Regional Sector's Cooperation Programme for coming years describes how the sector will achieve the vision in the 3 strategic priority areas for green, competitive and socially sustainable Nordic region. And thereby it contributes to important added value to our work. The new cooperation programme was initiated at the same time as the work to achieve the vision started. And this work has been very intensive during the last year. I think that this timing creates the best cases for the regional sector's work to contribute to our common vision. I sincerely hope that Nordregio Forum 2020 event series will serve both as an exciting conclusion to the current cooperation program, as well as a warm-up for the future initiatives. And hereby, I thank you for the opportunity to address you today and wish you all an exciting day. Looking forward to cooperating with you during the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, so much. We had a slightly bad connection there, and I think you also have some of our whispering in the background. But thank you so much for the welcome and the kind words. And we're also looking forward very much to seeing the results of this Nordic Vision. So it'll be some exciting years ahead, and I really think that Nordregio has a lot to contribute. So thank you for now. So we will continue the program now, and I would like to introduce our other host for today, Johanna Falk-Westhoff, who will be in charge of a lot of our interactive elements. We have a different we have the option for you to send questions in the Q&A section, and we also will run surveys in Mentimeter. So Johanna, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Michael. We will start with a short video to introduce you to today's theme.
During the past decades, the housing market in the Nordics have gone through significant changes. In many rural areas, the market value of houses is low, often considerably below the cost of construction. What is the role of financing, the role of municipalities, and the potential benefits of larger rental market? What are the effects of policies on spatial injustices? And how do we increase access to housing in urban areas with predominantly unaffordable options? Welcome to the first session of Nordregio Forum 2020, Non-Functioning Housing Markets in the Nordics.
All right, so we will start straight away with our first mentee to kind of get an understanding of how you feel about today's topic. So if you all go to menti.com, and you should see the code on your screen now. And here is the first question of today. How well do you think the housing market functions for ordinary citizens in your country? And
yes, now it'll be interesting to see if you agree with us, if we are actually dealing with non-functioning housing markets or not. If you don't agree with us, hopefully we can convince you throughout our discussions today that at least we have some challenges ahead of us.
Absolutely. I see the results are coming in. Very interesting. And there we go. They're still dropping in, but the majority seems to think that they are working fairly well. Small percent thinks very well, but yeah, a majority thinks fairly well. That is relatively good, I would say.
There is room for improvement.
There is room for improvement.
For
definitely.
sure.
Mm. Okay, so
Yes, well, then we are actually ready for our speakers. We have an exciting lineup of speakers for you today. First out, we have Egon Nohr from University of Southern Denmark. Then we have Moa Tunström from University of Karlstad. And finally, we have Søren Kvist Eliasen, sorry, Danish. But he is from Nordregio, who is located here in Stockholm. They make up the speakers for the first section here, and also they will be available for a question and answer session. So please remember that you can pose questions to the speakers in the question and answer section. So first out, we would like to welcome you, Egon Nohr, sorry, I keep saying that. Egon Nohr, welcome. Professor of Health and Inequality, I believe, and also head of the Danish Center for Rural Research. But you have promised to give us an overview today of the housing sector from a general perspective, not just rural perspective, and you're also going to talk about financialization, I believe, so I'm curious to hear more about this. So over to you, Egon.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank for the opportunity to be the first speaker this series of events, and it's a great honor for me. Then I am in a position where I can't see the PowerPoint presentation here. Is it working? Okay. Yes, thank you. The title of my presentation was "Make Housing Market Work for People." And I think it's a quite challenging title for this opening speech, but I'll try to, given the vote before, I'll try to convince you that there is a problem. You may change to the next slide. Underlying this title, of course, there is a contention of that the housing market is not working for people. I was told to give an overall perspective, but of course my own perspective, where have the strongest knowledge, is a rural perspective. And I have to say, a lot of people would not agree with this, because there's a lot of people who really thinks and feel that the housing market is working quite well for them, and they are indeed making a lot of profit out of it. But the main problem, seen from my point of view, is that homes have been transformed from object of use to objects of investment, from working for people to working from the financial market. And of course, it's a quite complex matter, but I'll try to give you a short and hopefully a little provocative introduction to the line of argument behind this statement. And there is three elements of this argumentation. First is as already mentioned, the introduction to what's meant by this financialization of owner-occupied dwellings or private housing market, and what is the effect of this financialization, and least what to do about it. And of course, it's a quite complex matter, but I'll try to introduce you to some of the main elements of this financialization. And we may have the next slide, please. Underlying this process of financialization, there is I think, as I'll argue later on, it was very much taking point of departure in late 80s and the early 90s, when we're talking about the housing market. And the first element was the liberalization of the financial market that were opened up for investors to cross borders, and the equity of owner-occupied dwellings became interesting for the financial market, there was a kind of security for the markets out that in a situation where it was a lot of investment was unsure, it become more and more interesting from the financial market perspective. And then from a political perspective, it also become interesting a way to stimulate economic growth, because the liquidity of these private homes could be turned into income and as a kind of work as a kind of kickstart for economic growth. And as a part of this, there was developed a whole range of new financial mortgage products. We know from US the subprime loan that was very much accelerated the house market price over there. And also there was a change from, especially in Denmark, I think in most countries, there was a change from long-term interest rate to short-term interest rate that meant more market sensitive, but also in general a lower interest rate. And all in all, this led to a decrease interest rate more or less continuously from early 90s to now, and it had materialized in increasing housing prices. And especially in Denmark, we experienced a huge house price bubble in the middle of the zeros, and what was a part of this financial crisis we experienced in Denmark. So all in all, the interaction between these complex elements stimulate that equity was turned into income from a house owner's perspective, especially if you have a house situated in a growing market. And as a result, home was transformed from object of use to object of investment, from working for people to working for the financial market, and from a social right to a means of wealth. And these statements I have from the literature about financialization of the owner occupied dwellings. We may change to the next. And just to visualize how this financialization had developed, I find this graph presented the increase in mortgage to GDP in different countries as an expression of how much more mortgages that have been offered to the housing market. And if we see all the Nordic country within this, unfortunately, I did not have for the rest of the Nordic country in this figure. But if you see in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, there was they all experienced a quite strong increase in mortgage to GDP rate from 2000 to 2012 or 10. And if you have the same figure from 1990 to 2020, you'll see a very, very strong increase in the mortgage to GDP rate. What's also interesting is that it's especially in countries, small countries with the open economy, where they have used this as a means to stimulate the economic growth in these countries. And of course, it was not. I mean, this financialization is not. There's not an evil master plan behind. But I think you may switch to the next, please. There was not an evil master plan behind this. But as an unintended consequence, we have seen a self-propelling accumulation of wealth from periphery to center. Strongly driven by this uneven development in house prices. And what do I mean by self-propelling? I mean, for a long time, the main argument behind this development had been urbanization, that it's an effect that people they want to live in cities. But another explanation is that it seems reasonable that people move to places where they obtain the best investment of their when buying houses, and also that for the financial market, it's also it's the most safe and secure investment to lend money out in areas where there is increased housing, where the housing prices is increasing, because then there's a strong market and the risk of losing money is minimal there. But as a result, it's also a giant spatial segregation machine, because people are moving to where they can afford to move. I mean, if we want to build a more luxury house, you need to move to an area where the market support this. So what we're seeing is this financialization. At least that's my argument. That is a kind of really contributing to this segregation. And we see if we look to some of the countries at the moment where you really see this spatial segregation, is also where you have a strong financialization of the housing market. It's also having an effect that is redlining some areas where you're not able to obtain a mortgage loan for either purchase or restoration of your houses. So you have rural areas where the market the financial market simply do not support the housing market. You have the same. You have other effects in larger cities, as also will be a theme today, where the increasing housing prices is squeezing people with lower income out of cities, and where it's very difficult to find affordable houses. And also in rural areas, you have a elder population that is not able to. Well, they have had the expectation that they could live from the savings in the house, but because the market there is collapsing, they do not have any savings anymore, and they are not able to sell the house. So there's a lot of elder people in a very bad situation in rural areas. And in what we see, the regulation after the financial crisis somehow enforce this, because it's seen from a financial point of view. It's important that you do not end up in a situation again where you do not have money enough to lend out. So to reduce risk, there's been a lot of regulation going on, among others from the general regulation of the Basel III. So it become after the financial crisis, it become even more difficult to borrow money in large rural areas, and we have seen there was some drop of housing price immediately after the financial crisis, but we've seen that in the cities and the centers, the house market have regained the potential again, but it's the market in the rural areas have not regained yet. And I have some figures to support this. Next slide. See, this slide is just an illustration that where you can see the change that happened in the early 90s, because until that, of course, the graph can cheat a little bit because it's not a potential, it's not a logarithmic graph, but still I think it's quite clear to see that there was a shift in how the housing market works in the early 90s, and I think there's natural differences, but it was more or less around 80s and early 90s that this financialization of the housing markets took off. Next slide, please. Here we can see how I've calculated the development in housing prices from 2000 and from 1992 and to 2016, and it's calculated from the different groups of municipalities in Denmark, where we have the upper purple is city municipalities, the light blue is the close to city municipalities, and the green is what we normally call rural and municipalities, and the red one is the far out municipalities. And I think it's a clear visualization that there is this center to for every differentiation of house prices, and that after the financial crisis in 2007-8, the prices for the house prices in the big cities have regained, but it's still going down in the outer rural areas. And if we see, we should go to the next slide, please. This just two slides showing about what is the mortgage lending per year for these different kinds of municipalities, and we can see that it's the city municipalities that is obtaining the far largest share of the yearly lending in mortgage, and if we see if we go to the next slide, you see that there is the total mortgage lending for the cluster of municipalities. You see that the city municipality is more or less accounting for half of all the mortgage lending in Denmark. So it's just an illustration of this how uneven this market is, and that the red one, the outer municipalities, is more or less not part of this mortgage system. Unfortunately, I didn't have the figures before 2009 because from Danish statistics. But if we compare with the other graph, we could realize that it had been there's been a huge differentiation going on. And what to do about it, how to make market work for people. If you go to the next slide. I know it's not a very popular statement, but I think we need to tame this financialization of the housing market by restricting some of the driving forces, and at least from a Danish perspective, the profit made from increasing housing pricing is more or less tax-free, but also some of the driving forces for this financialization is introduction of low rate, the short rate mortgage loan with a higher risk, and the use of introduction of interest rate only. And then finally, this as a part of this financialization, and digitalization, the area become a much more stronger determinant of the house prices, and thereby what's possible to borrow for investment in houses or building or rebuilding. And as an argument, also logical argument here, is that the problem cannot be solved by the measures we are trying to use today, by removing the surplus of houses or decentralization and governmental guarantee for financial risk. They are important, but I think as long as we do not reduce the financialization, the other issues will not work properly. And the final slide. So if we want to make house work for people, I think we need to work on retransform homes from objects of investment to object of use. So make the housing market work for people and not only for the financial market. And if you want to read more about the argumentation behind this financialization, you can find in our fresh report on boligfinansiering i landdistrikterne, that can be downloaded at our homepage, Center for Rural Research. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Egon. Remember, everyone, that you can ask questions for Egon that we will take in the question and answer section later. But right now, we would also like to ask you a question right away. So we will go to the mentee.
Yes, and the next question is related to what Egon just spoke about. So how problematic do you think the financialization phenomenon just discussed is for the housing market?
We can see people are answering.
People are answering straight away, and if you don't remember the code, then here it is. We are getting some responses in.
Well, we can practice how to say financialization.
Yes.
While we're waiting for the results. It's quite a word and quite a troublesome phenomenon.
Absolutely. Yeah, answers are coming in, but I think that we can say already now that the majority of you agree that this is a major issue. Yes.
So,
yeah.
Thank you very much, Egon. We will come back to you in the question and answer section. Now we would like to welcome the next speaker, who is Moa Tunström, who is currently senior lecturer at Karlstad University. Welcome, Moa. You were also a former colleague from Nordregio, so it's really nice to see you here again. One of the last things you did at Nordregio was to work on this report as a curator of this report that we'll talk about now. Why does the contemporary Nordic welfare state lack affordable housing? You had a whole group of people write about this, and now you're going to give us an overview of some of their findings. So, Moa, over to you. And let me say, when you have 2 minutes left, I will just come in and say, Moa, 2 minutes left. Okay? We'll work with that.
Thank you. Sounds good. Yes, the project was supposed to contribute to Nordic learning on housing policy, and it was framed then as an urban issue, as a part of a social sustainability effort in line with this Nordic cooperation program for regional policy and planning that was mentioned earlier. And also initially there was an ambition to focus in particular on new housing development and on housing costs. It was expressed that high building costs makes it challenging to produce affordable housing. In the end, I think though that in this report, Building Affordable Homes, it's clear that the issue of affordable housing is that we need to see this issue in a broader context. It's not only about new production. Next slide, please. So we had this urban planning context, we had a social sustainability framework, and we had a focus on housing policy and costs. This led us then to the issue of affordability, because housing affordability is an issue in all the Nordic countries. There's also a strong ownership norm. Housing is a commodity and an investment, but at the same time then it's seen as a right. And this creates a challenge when aiming for social inclusion or social sustainability of cities, because Nordic cities are segregated. And housing construction or implementing different types of policies or subsidies, these tools can both reduce and also worsen segregation. And they have effect then on an arena that is clearly both public and private, both regulated and market driven. And it's also interesting to look at this in particular in the Nordic context, since it's a part of the Nordic identity that there is, or at least has been, a strong welfare model with access to good housing as one important ingredient. And also the Nordic context is interesting because in spite of this idea of a Nordic welfare model, when it comes to housing, it's actually quite challenging to compare the Nordic countries. And in spite of that there are similar political systems, similarities in the role of the local level in urban planning, for example, there are differences and also confusion around how we talk about housing, confusion around concepts that makes it difficult to compare, but perhaps the more reason to talk about it. But just bear in mind the risk of conceptual confusion when you're discussing housing across the Nordic countries and internationally in general. So in the end then, for our project, the question became something like, why does the contemporary Nordic welfare state lack affordable housing, or what's actually being done in the Nordic countries to increase the supply of affordable housing or to support vulnerable groups on the housing market? Next slide, please. To give a few examples of the discussion in the Nordic countries, I put up these 5 headlines. The first one says that the rental housing market in Norway is a marginal thing, and there's only a small rental sector and a very small social housing sector. This reduces the power of the municipality to influence housing and social sustainability through urban planning. Rental tenure is considered a temporary solution on the way to ownership. And rental housing is scarce and insecure. So to use tenure form as a tool for social inclusion has really not been very high on the agenda in Norway. And with market price as the main factor, also the issue is, this is not an issue only for the very vulnerable groups that they meet barriers on the market. It's also for the mid-bracket, so to say. Regarding Iceland, this is another country that has traditionally had a very small public housing sector and where ownership has been seen as basically the only model. The economic crisis hit hard in 2008, and it has had as one important effect that people lost their homes or they went from being owners to renters. and their new landlords were the banks or the credit institutions. And this led to actually to a politicization, almost as difficult a word as financialization of the housing issue, and resulted, for example, in the starting up of tenants associations that wanted to give voice to the rights of renters in relation to landlords, or protesting against evictions. In Finland, there is a polarization between the growth nodes and the declining regions, and this is an issue, of course, that has relevance outside of housing policy, but it means that there is a mismatch on the housing market, with high barriers to housing in the growth nodes, and again, this does not only affect the very vulnerable groups. Then, the situation on the housing market in certain cities might hinder people from settling there, in spite of access to higher education or jobs that match their education. In regions of decline, the housing market is also in decline. And this, of course, makes the housing issue rather complex, since there's a polarized national picture. Finland is, in addition, a country where tenure form is an issue, unlike then maybe in Norway. And there are more forms than strictly rent or strictly own, which is also something that might be interesting to learn more about. The next headline refers to Denmark, where there are trends of gentrification threatening the available stock of affordable housing. For example, students cannot find housing in university towns, and there is also pressure on the available social housing, which then and this housing type is often spatially segregated. So in all, this is not a good ground for social inclusion so urban social sustainability. And when it comes to the policy responses to this situation, there are those who are in favor of more regulation of the market, and those emphasizing less regulated construction and development process and more liberal planning act, for example. So this illustrates the political nature of the housing issue. Finally, the headline for Sweden points also to different interpretations of best policy responses, because the pressure on the housing market has raised concerns regarding increasing household debt. But there are also then those who are critical to restricting households taking on loan, since loan regulations can shut out first-time buyers from the market. And if ownership is the way to go, more people need to be able to take on a debt. In Sweden, tenure form is seen as a tool for social mix, but the effects of mixing rental and ownership housing in new developments can be discussed, since rent levels in new production are very high. Next slide, please. And this picture is trying to summarize a few selected instruments and proposals from each of the Nordic countries that want to boost supply or handle the mismatch. And there are, as you may be able to see, there are instruments directed to the production of housing, to the planning law, to the financing of construction, or to specific groups or category housing, or to the buyers. So it's obvious that the tools out there are more than about increasing the supply of affordable housing by new construction. And it's also obvious then that the tools point in different direction and need to be related to the national context or regional context or political context. For example, like the tools that are oriented to building more housing, they might raise questions about what types of housing, what tenure, what cost, or what category. The tool build for the vulnerable groups or build social housing can be considered a useful tool to supply that type of housing for vulnerable groups, or it can be seen as a tool that creates lock-ins and segregation. And tools that are take the form of subsidies or tax regulations might lead to an emphasis on ownership housing, and then it can be questioned if it misses the target and doesn't have the not have the intended effects. There are such examples in our report. And like I said, this is a mix of actual policies and suggested solutions. I'm not saying that this is how it should be done. I'm saying that this is part of the discourse in the Nordic countries. So next slide, please.
You have 2 minutes
Yes.
left.
Yes.
More. You're doing so well on time. It's
Yeah.
great to see you. Go ahead.
Can I see my final slide? Yeah, thank you. So just some final remarks. You can read more details in the report, Building Affordable Homes, that you can find on Nordregio's website. And the final message from me then would be that the idea of that housing is a commodity and a right is what makes this issue a complex issue. It's not the same as producing cars or selling cars or clothes or whatever. And it makes it an issue both for the market and for the government. And it's both about answering to demands from households and responding to demands from planning for social inclusion or pushing for different types of governance solutions. So those were my final words.
Thank you so much, Moa. Affordable housing is a problem throughout the Nordic region, but could you, I know you hate if I put things like that, but if you were to pick a winner, who would you say, who is the least problematic, or which country has managed to put in place the best policies to make housing more affordable? Can you?
I think
can we say anything about that?
Maybe not, but this report. I mean, I think all the contributions end in that there is more to be done, or there is more that needs to be done, or what is done is still in the process of developing. It's experiments or it's small-scale solutions. We'll see what happens, and also they depend on the political situation, who is in government. It's a national policy issue, but who is doing the best?
Well, we will return to it also later. I'm not going to keep you on the spot for that.
But as I was trying to, my message was showing the variety of tools, and also then that there is no clear image of what is the right tool, or what is the best tool, or what is the most functioning or efficient tool. It depends on if you think social housing is a good solution for affordability, or it depends on if you think ownership is the goal. And these things are political issues, normative issues.
Yes, and that actually leads us to our survey, our Menti question, because we would like to ask the audience also about the need for regulation. So Johanna, over to you.
Yes, and I can actually see that people have started to respond already. The question is, do you believe in more or less state regulation for an increased supply of affordable housing? And I know that there are more people than this participating, so please give us your vote. And you can all see that a majority thinks that there should be more state regulation. It would be interesting to see what country people come from when they say more and when they say less.
Yes. But
yes.
we will. I think that's an interesting conclusion also to your presentation, Moa, because I think that was one of the points you touched upon, as you said at the end, the need for regulation. So there seems to be a consensus about this issue.
Definitely, yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Moa. You'll be staying with us for the question and answer session also, of course. Please remember to send us your questions. We will move on to the next speaker, who is with us from Denmark. Søren Kvist Eliasson, hello there.
Hello.
Also a colleague from Nordregio, who is the co-author of another report that's also been produced for this Nordic Cooperation Program for Regional Development and Planning. And it's a report about rural housing challenges. And you're going to talk to us about the frozen housing market. So please proceed.
Okay, thank you. In that way, I'm partly in line with what Egon just mentioned, and it's definitely not. We also managed to cooperate throughout the project work, but I will argue for a frozen market and then show some of the mitigation measures we have found. But clearly we are on another level than we are not handling the financialization, as Egon talked about, but at a lower level. And we produced this report Michael talked about and a policy brief that can be found on the homepage, and I hope there will be sent links also. Please, the next slide. I plan to say a little bit about a few words about the project background, and then the challenges at the market, the frozen market, and finally the examples of mitigation that we found through the project. And the next slide, please. Regarding the next slide, please. Regarding the project, it was initiated and funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers, the rural development group under the Committee of Senior Officials for Regional Policy. And on their behalf, we did desk research, interviews with officials at national levels, including the autonomous areas, meaning Greenland, Faroe Island, and Åland, to learn about the rural challenges. And then we conducted 5 case studies, municipalities with rural challenges and examples of mitigating activities. Please, the next slide. Thank you. And what we found and what we heard from this group ordering the project is that all countries, they reported a general depopulation trend in many rural areas. This is the urbanization movement towards larger cities or maybe minor local towns. And this can also be seen on the Nordregio map we got here, which is the population change 2008 to 2017. So 10 years. It's high resolution, 5 times 5 kilometers, where the blue is increasing and yellow-red is decreasing population. And what we see, just the general overview, is that the coastal areas and city areas has increased population and rural areas decreased population. And this leads to empty houses in many areas. And in some areas, this forms a special challenge. Empty, decaying private houses is seen as a special challenge in Denmark. And we then heard that in Finland and Greenland, apartments owned by municipal housing companies was a special challenge here. And these empty houses, of course, create a negative economic spiral and a downward pressure on the housing prices, and this impression of decay also for the population remaining. But at the same time, all countries, including these mentioned, we registered a need for renewing the houses or to build new houses suiting new needs in the rural areas. And let me see. And somewhat due to local growth, new industries developing, and in some Nordic countries, there are immigrants that inhabit the rural areas also. And then there was the existing population that had new needs, for instance, housing for elderly, that want to move to smaller apartments close to the social and health system. And looking closer at this map, actually we can see that there are some areas that we would see as very rural. Even here is blue dots, and this shows the dynamics within the rural areas. So at the same time we have empty houses and need for construction of new, modern and suitable housing opportunities. Please, the next slide. And this leads to a model that we have developed in the project. Egon already talked about the low market prices in the rural areas. The whole house represents the cost of construction, whereas we can see that the market value of the house is considerably lower in such. And this means that there are this risk of loss, economic loss of investing in a house in the rural area. And if you build the house and sell it right away to market price, then there's definitely this loss. Then we can see in the light blue part in the bottom, this is the mortgage option, which is normally 80% of the market value. And this leaves, if you press the bottom again, this leaves an investor, somebody wanting to build a house in the rural area, which is an enormous financial gap, which is this gap between what you can get from the normal financial system and what you need for building the house. So either you need expensive sources for financing, or you might not be able to get the loan at all, because as we can see, a part of this financial gap is not secured by the value of the house. And this, of course, has implications. Please, the next slide. So I'm not clear in the definition, but we could say, is this market frozen? At least we can see that there is empty, decaying houses and sad impression for those left in the rural areas where the neighbors to these houses. And then there is these financial barriers to move internally or into the rural areas. And this leads to lack of housing for new needs in the rural areas, and rural interested persons which wants to try it out, they are excluded or trapped if they invest in here. And it also, by the way, means that there is no or low capital generation in the rural houses. Egon briefly touched up on this also. The house cannot function as your pension fund, and it cannot function as security for loan for startup new economic activities. So it influences a lot of things going on in the rural areas. But next slide, please. We have seen here that there is this financial gap, and it might not be wise economically to move to rural areas. So why do somebody do this anyway? Please click on this. There must be something else, non-market values that is felt as attractive enough to do this investment. And this actually opens opportunities for municipalities and local initiatives to create these values that might influence the market value, but after all create the non-market values, even if they are not expressed in market values. Next slide, please. To try to grab this, we borrowed a model from the Norwegian Institute for Urban and Regional Research, NIBR. They emphasizes that when you choose to move into a house, then you first see if you want to go to the place, the community or town. And in that way, the first model very much tend to see market prices as given, mostly due to macro level factors. Here are factors that can be influenced at local level. And then they NIBA highlight that there are certain things that requirements to the place, livelihood, jobs, or at least you can commute to jobs, natural qualities, service infrastructure, which could be schools, kindergartens, healthcare, meeting places, cafes, and so on, and social qualities, which could be family network or inclusive social norms at individual level or organized in clubs or organizations. And this forms the attractiveness of the place, which is the first condition for moving here and taking this economic risk of loss after all. Now, if I can have the next slide, please. In this project, we did these case studies, and I will here present in three groups different mitigating measures. The next slide and the next again. Yeah, the next. Thank you. The first issue is more on state or municipal level, public measures regarding the financial gap. We found a few countries focusing, so to say, on the supply side, actually reducing the housing stock by support demolition of houses, as takes place in Denmark, or apartment blocks in Finland. Most, though, focus on the demand side for supporting this or thawing this frozen market. There's these general investment subsidies for construction that also Moa talked about, which can be also used in the rural areas. I think we will hear about these considerations from Stavsø later. And then there's directed investment from the state top-up loan, addressing the loan need to get higher than the 80% of the market value. And several countries or regions offer top-up loan or guarantee for loan that raise the loan level from 80 to 95% of the market value. And in Iceland, under some conditions, they offer top loan up to 80% of the actual cost, which, as we saw from the model at least, is actually more than 95% of the market value. So there are measures to do. And then we also saw other policies that influence this factor, relocating state institutions and infrastructure and so on. Let's have the next slide. The case study focused on.
Sorry, Søren, just sorry to break in here. You have 2 minutes left. Sorry, yes. It became a little abrupt now, but you're doing fine, and just so we can keep the schedule.
The municipalities, that was the case studies, and we saw the municipalities could react reactive or proactive on these challenges by municipal housing plans to foresee future needs, and they could buy up areas and prepare for construction and play a facilitation role, brokering between the demand and the potential entrepreneurs and reducing the risk related to this. We also saw a municipality encourage norms of community activism, and some, depending of the legal opportunity, played a financial role. Fast to the second but last slide. The next one, please. The next slide, please. Okay, I just wanted to say that we saw that rentals can create flexibility in the rural areas by offering rentals for elderly moving from their home, starting moving chains, or temporary stepping stone for new inhabitants in the regions for labor, for shorter or longer stay, or for rural interested newcomers to learn the place before investing. But to sum up here, as came a frozen market, at least there are strong indication, and we can see that this market situation influences the development, the broader development in rural communities. There are towing measures, state interventions, and municipalities and locals can create non-market values. But I think, having Egon's presentation in mind, we could discuss if this is a solution that covers all rural areas, or it can only be practiced in a limited number of places, and then what about the rest? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Søren. We will go to a Menti question now, which actually relates directly to your presentation. So it'll be interesting to see what people have to say about the options we will provide here. Over to you, Johanna.
Yes, thank you. So the next question comes here. From your perspective, what should we focus on first to improve the rural housing situation? And just Menti away, here are the details again. Yeah, these are maybe a bit more difficult to respond to, but please share your ideas with us on this.
Yes, it seems that we have a lot of interesting comments coming in now, and I think the local initiatives is sort of the most popular. Is that correct? No, it's sort of a tie now.
Yeah, the proactive municipal housing planning and investment is coming up a bit more and more. Do we have more people out there?
It's a very volatile issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is totally anonymous, so please share your thoughts with us. Well, I think we can say that proactive municipal housing planning and investment is the number one option, followed by local bottom-up initiatives for housing and attractiveness.
So, Søren, what do you say to these results?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit surprising, as we just heard that the state should play a much larger role in the last Mentimeter question. But at the other hand, I'm very much in favor of local activity, bottom-up initiatives, and in that way, I'm very pleased that this is what is seen. I think we should be aware of these structural factors also. But I certainly think that these local activities is a very central key to increase the quality of life in rural areas, and also to solve some of these housing challenges.
So what, I mean, we talked a lot about this, the need for regulation, the market forces, the financialization, all these external factors, but as you say now, you address this bottom up, and we will actually hear more about this as one of your case studies will be part of our session after the break. Actually, an example from Stävsjö in Sweden that shows how much you can do locally. After you worked with this, what would you say? I mean, what can municipalities actually do to improve this situation, the housing situation?
Well, I think the municipalities, well, it depends. They have it differs between the countries what power they have to do something, and they are dependent on development around them in the other areas. But I think they can influence quite some things, and I was very surprised and positively to meet the example from Sweden we will hear about later, that you can actually, in a cooperation between municipality and local bottom-up initiatives, actually can reach some results.
Yeah, public-private partnerships is something we'll come back to also.
Yeah.
So now I would like to leave the floor open, actually, for questions from the audience. So we are ready for more questions coming in. Johanna,
Yes.
have we received anything?
We've received quite many questions, which I'm very happy to see. Let's see where we should start. Well, here is a question, and I'll let you decide who should respond to this. But why is regulating the market considered as a demand side and not supply side solution?
Why is it a demand side and not a supply side? Well, Søren, you actually talk about this, but Egon also. Maybe Egon first. Could you address this issue?
That's a hard one. I think.
Yes, we see you kind of in a strange way right now, but.
Is it okay now?
We can hear you. So just keep talking, Egon. So demand, supply.
I think it's a difficult one because I mean, if you talk about this from an urbanization theory, okay, then you should reduce the supply side because there is too many houses there, and that's the main argument. That's the main argument for the decreasing house prices. But you could also think about another supply side, and that's the financial supply, because it's easier to borrow money in some areas, and that's driving the activity to the areas where it's easy to look at look at the supply. So maybe you should think about regulating the supply side, and so it gives a more even incitement for investment.
Well, that was actually one of the premises for why we call this event a non-functioning housing sector. That well, in the cities, housing is so expensive that people can afford to stay there, at least middle income, and in the rural areas, as both you and Søren mentioned, their houses are valued at such a low price that it's impossible to get a mortgage financed. So yes, I think there's something about these market forces that's definitely not working.
But one thing, not to be a party killer, but one thing I think is interesting in discussion today is that it seems like a lot of these solutions that we can come up with, it does not include the financial market, which seems like, okay, we have completely given up to make the financial market work in a way that it works for housing. And so we try to either to turn it into a local problem or to find other way of financing. But I think, and I don't know, but I think we should not too soon give up to make the financial market work in a better way for the housing. Otherwise, I think it's difficult to solve the problem. And also, not to be a party killer, but I think what we can see in a Danish context is that, okay, there are some local areas that does it a lot better than others, but it seems like it's not a competition between center and periphery. It's a competition between neighborhoods. Some villages are able to keep the school, and others are losing, and so it's not really a game changer. It's just a competition between who is losing the most.
That's this
On the
issue
other
also
hand, I
of
think-
attractiveness that Søren was mentioning.
Yeah.
But we could see from also from the feedback we got from the participants that regulation is something that we really that is in demand. People would like to see more regulation. So I think we should move on now to the next question. So Johanna?
Yes. Yeah, and the next question is actually also for Egon. Along with the financialization, also the planning laws are governing or creating imbalances, especially in Denmark. And the rural areas are thus less attractive for investments. Would making the conditions for housing more equal in urban and rural areas at waterlines, coastal and natural attractive areas by easing up the planning laws a way forward? Would that be a way forward?
Very long question.
That is a very long question, yes.
I think we would like very short questions, but we would of course welcome all questions. So Egon, did you get it?
Yes, and I have a very short answer to the question. First of all, I'm not an expert in that, but I think when we easing the plan law, I think it would, of course, it would support the building of summer houses and other kind of activities. But I'm not sure it would increase the or solve the problem for private houses. But to be honest, I'm not an expert in that.
We have an economist also coming up with us after the break, so we can put all the difficult questions to him, I guess.
Yes.
So questions
yes.
for Moa or Søren?
Can I come in?
Yes, please, Moa, you have a comment.
Yeah, because I think maybe this question about supply and demand came from my last slide, where I sort of used the shorthand way of writing. So I wrote affordability is about supply, that means new construction, or demand, regulating the market. I just wanted to say what I wanted to emphasize was the issue of making people reducing the barriers to the market, maybe, or making people able to act on the market as a buyer or as a taking a loan for in order to be able to act on the market. That's what I wanted to emphasize. So it was not about that it was not concerned supply. I just wanted to emphasize that constructing more housing or regulating the different groups' situations on the market. I hope that maybe explains it.
Okay, thank you so much. We will see if we have more questions coming up.
Yes, we do. And the first one: to what extent has the pandemic contributed to the urban exodus in Nordic context, and how has this impacted on housing affordability in rural or urban areas?
So, who would like to answer this? Affordability.
I have no
talking
idea.
About money.
Unfortunately, I have no idea if it has influenced yet. So I would like not to try to answer.
No.
No,
we will save that for the economist.
Yes. We have one more question. Oh, we have more questions. But how common are private institutions which focus on providing financing for social housing projects in the Nordics?
So could you repeat that again?
Yes. How common are private institutions that focus on providing financing for social housing projects in the Nordics?
So we keep moving in the financial sector. Egon, could you maybe answer this?
Sorry, I have no good answer to that.
Maybe I can say something.
Yes, over to you, Moa.
No, because I didn't say much about this in my presentation, but the concept of social housing means different things in different countries. So it's a bit complicated to answer. But I mean, mostly it means some sort of public funding. That's in my understanding, at least. So I don't know if there are private institutions trying to enter this market, but I think mostly it means public funding.
Okay, thank you. So we will continue with the next question.
Yes. Several Nordic and other studies demonstrate the importance of social factors in migration decisions. Could they be addressed as such rather than as non-economic factors? Shall I repeat that?
So the question of social factors. Well, we talked a little bit about this. At least the attractiveness issue is very important. Søren, you mentioned something about this. Is this something you could elaborate on?
Well, this was not in the focus for the study, so I'm not expert or having recent research on this, but based on this study from NIBRA, certainly they showed that there are certain requirements for choosing to move to an area, and here certainly social issues is social factors are important, and I think that the good examples of then you can discuss if it's as Egon mentioned, if it's one area that is actually competing with the other rural areas, but those which manage to increase the number of inhabitants, I definitely think they have a high social capital, competences of different ways, and what I call a social inclusive culture. So I definitely think that this means something, and we can see if we all acted as economic man, then we shouldn't move or stay in the rural areas. We should invest our money in the towns where you can get better, higher, increasing housing prices. So so these social factors, I definitely think they play a huge role for at least immigrating to the rural areas. But it was not a subject or an issue in this study.
But this
Can I add to that?
Yes, of course, Egon.
Because one of my statement was that this financialization was a big segregation machine, and I think there is at least two very observable factors going on. One is that there is a lot of less resource strong people that are pushed towards the less developed part of the country, because they where they can find cheap renting houses or so. And the other one is that if you want to build or to buy and renovate a house according to your income standard, you need to move to areas where it's possible. So we see a lot of this segregation going on, and of course, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't follow this logic and make, from an economic point of view, very stupid investments and use a lot of energy because they want other qualities in relation to their daily life.
So there is a room for maneuvering for local communities. That's basically what you're saying. So actually, maybe we could, because we start talking a little bit now also about segregation. The topic of the next Nordregio Forum is inclusive cities. So maybe we could also take a preview of that discussion. I know this is something you have worked with Moa quite a lot. So Moa, would you like to maybe comment on that in this context also?
On the risk for segregation?
Yes.
Or, I mean, that's I think that was one of the issues that framed why we did this housing policy focused on affordable housing. It was the situation of segregation, and it's also comes up all the time in the contributions, I think, as a starting point, but also as a risk from like if you want to support vulnerable groups by building cheaper housing, you can also risk increasing segregation. Sorry, there are a lot of messages on the screen that was distracting me.
Well, this is usually a topic that brings up a lot of opinions, of course.
Yeah, and also the issue of tenure forms is also often framed in a segregation context, that some people manage to enter the rental market, but they don't manage to enter the ownership market. So it becomes a sorting mechanism. So social mix is maybe an ideal that doesn't really result in integration, but instead emphasizes segregation, because some people live in the rental housing areas and some people live in the ownership areas. Yeah.
So this is contributing to this, the gaps that we have discussed, really. It's not just financial gaps, it's also social gaps. It's actually gaps between people. It's gaps between city and countryside, but also gaps between different kinds of people, really, or different groups of social groups, obviously.
Yeah.
And even on an ethnic level, maybe.
Maybe even that,
to some extent. But I know that, Søren, you mentioned one of the policies in Denmark is that you simply just tear down buildings. They work, they try to work on the supply side in a way by removing houses. That also happens in the so-called ghetto areas in Denmark. But how successful have they been in Denmark with doing this? Now, not so much speaking of the ghetto policies, but also in the rural areas.
Well, you must say that actually the funding for removing houses that people have given up of some reason is less than what is yearly coming in. So this is not a way to solve the problem. But anyway, it at least in minor settlements, then if there's one or two such decaying houses, then the municipality have the opportunity to buy the house cheaply and then tear it down and sell it to the neighbor just for, without the right to build on this area. And of course, it has a function for reducing the supply. But honestly, it's also a matter of making the local area nicer. And then there's also this challenge that these poor people Egon talks about, that is pushed out of the larger cities. There has been an industry of buying up these very bad standard houses and then rent it to these people with nowhere else to live. And in that way, it's also a way to protect yourself of export of social problems from the towns to the rural areas. So there are more than just reducing the supply element in this. But I think they actually managed to establish nice villages in Lolland Falster where they have done this the most, and which is the case in our study. And these municipalities raise in the they seems much nicer, and I'm sure that the livability is much higher. Though so far I haven't seen that it can be measured in the market prices. So it, as a tool for decreasing the supply to get a higher market price, it seems not to function like that.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll have to wrap up this interesting discussion now. And now I just use the word ghetto, which in Danish is often used for socially challenged areas. So maybe that set the kind of mood, and we would that's not a very fortunate mood probably, and we don't want to end this on a negative note. But we have a short Menti for you here about coming up about what is your mood at the moment. So Johanna.
Yes, there we go. Another Menti for you. There you have the code. It's the same one as earlier, and just share a word with us that describes your main takeaway so far, or a feeling, as Michael just said. Complicated. Oof, that's a hard start.
Yes.
Complexity. Hopeless.
Oh.
Oh,
We didn't
I
want to
hope
leave
you're
you.
yeah, I hope that refers to the housing market.
Well, I see very informative coming up at least.
Yes.
Why don't we leave you with this Menti, and then we'll
Yes.
take a short break. I think everyone needs to have a leg stretch, maybe a cup of coffee, and we will be back again at 20 minutes to 3. So thank you so much, and thank you for the speakers in this first section. We have a very exciting lineup coming in the second section. Some of them we mentioned already. So please come back to us in a little less than 10 minutes. We'll continue the discussion, and thank you for the 3 speakers.